Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our Polimi PhD summer school students and to the general public that is here today. We are very pleased to welcome you to one of the four keynote speeches that the program of our summer school offers this year. The first one will be with Dr. Betti Marenko. Dr. Marenko is a reader and designer at Central St. Martin. She has a background in philosophy and design, and she works at the intersection of these two disciplines with a specific approach, which is the idea of understanding how to speculating futures and addressing the dimension of virtuality and non-human and the non-human dimension, which fits perfectly within the topic of our summer school, which is tackling the idea of more than human features which are existing and possibly be designable or undesignable, probably, as Betti will discuss with us. So thank you very much, Betti, for being here also this year. I'll leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, Chiara, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here again. Hi, everyone. I think I'm ready to share my screen so we can start immediately. Okay, so the title of my talk today is Critical Practice in the Algorithmic Age. And this topic has been prompted by a recent volume called Critique and the Digital, which actually asks the question, how do we do critique in the algorithmic age? And this has prompted me to really think about how do we do critical practice as well. So this is my starting point to offer some ideas around knowledge making in the era of planetary computation, and then pushing it forward to really think about the critical practice, by which I mean future crafting, terraforming intervention informed by creativity and criticality, which is philosophy in action, which is speculative and pragmatic to produce tangible proposition. So let's start with the idea of planetary computation. We can define broadly planetary computation as the impact of digital media technologies on a planetary scale. And this is not just about numbers, even though we know that almost 60% of the global population are online, 2.7 billion Facebook active users per month, etc. This is not just about figures. What characterized this era is a shift from mediation to immediation, where information is increasingly sensed, so perceived through our senses rather than understood. And this process produces the types of sense-making where signification is no longer located in objects, but becomes or emerges from communicating systems and agents which are sort of operating as a general hum beyond or even below our human perception. And this mutation is effectively rewiring cognitive abilities and our capacity to understand, to feel, to perceive. And one of the champions of this idea is design and media theorist Benjamin Bratton, who describes a planetary computation as an accidental megastructure comprised of overlapping functional layers, which he calls stacks. And quite literally, he says, planetary computation is a stack extending down to the mines of Central Africa through subterranean data centers and the transoceanic cables to interlaced urban networks, up to the glowing glass rectangles through which we view it and it views us. In his perspective, planetary computation is not virtual. It is a kind of terraforming of the host planet, which is made possible by technology and through technology. But what matters for us today is how this computational sensorial environment produces a more than human experience without almost without the need of a perceiving subject. So therefore, beginning to unhinge subject and object and decentering the classical location of the human subject as the agent of reason. And there are several consequences of this process. For Luciano Florida, professor of philosophy and ethics of information at the University of Oxford, it is the very human understanding of the fabric of reality which is changing, in which now the virtual and the real are enmeshed, and the digital online world spills over and merge with the analog offline world. And Florida calls this the on-life experience, where information and data, as well as their design, management, and trading, become the new currency. So our human understanding of the natural reality is shifting from a mechanistic Newtonian perspective to an informational, computational one. And whether we agree with this or not, one thing is certain, that as humans, we are now inhabiting hybrid ecosystems where the organic, the artificial, the engineered, the synthetic are entangled, entanglements of silicon and carbon. And whether we are philosophers, designers, engineers, computer scientists, or social scientists, this is the landscape we have to contend with. Now, for some, this has to be framed as an existential threat to humanity. And for others, is the route to superintelligence. But I would suggest that we should stay clear from both techno-dystopia and techno-euphoria, both highly deterministic, and instead trying to see planetary computation as a challenge to rethink reason in a landscape of non-human reasoning, and then to reflect on the impact of this new logic of the outside, of the unknown, for critical practice. And to articulate these new ecologies of human and non-human and the epistemological and ontological reorganization they initiate, it's also useful to look at some of the original ideas behind the notion of planetary computation. In the 80s, French philosopher Felix Guattari was one of the first thinkers to talk about planetary computation, and he envisioned the emergence of new ways of living and being based on the increasing miniaturization and personalization of apparatuses, really at the dawn of a computer era. And already in 1979, he wrote, "The computer is effectively on the point of being integrated into a complex of enunciation in which it will become impossible to separate out human intervention and machinic creativity." Effectively, he was anticipating the current landscape where human and non-human, the human and the non-humanity of machines are cohabiting. He developed these ideas in the wonderful book, The Three Ecologies, where he discusses how, and I quote, "the acceleration of the technological and data processing revolutions as prefigured in the phenomenal growth of computer-aided subjectivity would then lead to a fundamental repositioning of human beings in relation to their environment, both machinic and natural." Now, the interesting thing about his perspective it's not simply that he was foreseeing our present, but also the fact that he placed a great emphasis on the creative and liberating potential of this new form of subjectivity emerging from what he defined the post-media era. And also, I think his contribution is still really valid because it furnishes us with ways of thinking about these human-machine ecologies that stay clear of techno-determinism and also stay clear of those naive notions of machines as neutral tools. Sorry, I have a hiccup.
E poi a settembre appunto una ulteriore iterazione.
I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay now. Instead, what Guattari actually highlights is how planetary computation undermines the structural distinction between machine and cognition and really forces us to rethink about the boundaries between human and non-human. Another way of describing this scenario, which I want to share with you, is perhaps through the notion of the technological unconscious. And indeed, Guattari himself has been described by media theorist Eric Horle as the first general ecologist of the technological unconscious. And this expression was actually coined by an Italian artist, Franco Vaccari, whose book Fotografia Inconscio Tecnologico from 1979 developed some ideas that he had already introduced in the 60s. And for instance, at the Venice Biennale in 1972, he installed a photo booth, inviting audience to leave a photographic trace of their passage on the wall, effectively producing an incomplete artwork and prefiguring a new type of connection between users, technology, and art, which from the 90s we might have then called as relational art. Now, the technological unconscious concerns the autonomous capacity of the machine and its power to produce memory independent from human awareness by recursively reshaping the world. And it points to an increasing autonomy of the machine, and this has key implication that we are beginning to witness now. So let's look a little bit more closely at how machines actually work, in particular how machine learning systems work. Machine learning and deep learning systems are calculative techniques that quantify and compress the world through discrete functions by posing problems as a binary, yes or no question. They're systems of decision making that select a particular result among possible alternatives, and there are environments that are designed to learn recursively, so they're not programmed. Now, the central principle of machine learning is the automated discovery of abstraction. This means that on the basis of the data the machine is fed, the machine is able to automatically generate the abstraction it needs for detection and classification. So what the machine is doing is extracting and organizing information from data. For many media and computation scholars, machine learning and deep learning systems become quasi-autonomous artificial agents, system characterized by two fundamental factors. First of all, decision-making is transferred from human to machines. And this is something that affects millions of people, millions of us every day, as classification, patterning, clustering, ranking determines the search engine results we see, spam filters, social media updates, preferences, credit scoring, etc. The other interesting aspect here is that human users, including computer scientists, have a little or limited understanding of the mechanism through which the system achieves the outcomes. So while computer scientists are trying to find solution to this so-called interpretability problem, I am more interested in how philosophers and designers and social scientists conceptualize and make use of new modes of knowledge making that are emerging. For instance, in this recent article, philosopher Beatrice Fazzi argues that what algorithmic modeling performs is not an interpretation of data, but the construction of new complex words in equally new and complex computational ways. So this is not an alternative picture of the world, but a sort of liquid sequence that exists only in algorithmic form, and therefore is a non-human mode of thinking that seems to precede our human capacity to think about it. And Fazzi's key point is that this mode of thinking of the machine is not commensurable to human creativity and reason. And this is a very important point. the abstractive capacities that computational machines display, clustering, classifying, patterning, etc., are not only specific to the machine and independent from human programmers, but, she says, they are incommensurable to human cognition. Effectively, we have two different decision-making processes. They cannot be measured one against the other, one human, one computational, and they don't share a common nomenclature. Therefore, this is no longer a computer science problem, becomes an epistemological and an ontological issue. The question, therefore, is how do we build a theory of knowledge and a critical practice that are appropriate to these distinct epistemological and ontological domains without flattening them, without reducing the uncertainty, but also without creating mystification. And the most important, that can work for the designer, for the philosopher, for the computer scientist. Now, it is tempting to see the incommensurability that Fazzi discusses as the signal of an emerging alien rationality. And one of the risks here is to be seduced by this narrative. And this is what Kate Crawford and Alexander Campolo in this wonderful recent paper titled Enchanted Determinism, they discuss precisely this. And they use this expression to describe narratives around artificial intelligence which produce mythologies. They describe it as a discourse that presents deep learning techniques as magical, outside the scope of present scientific knowledge, yet also deterministic, in that deep learning systems can nonetheless detect patterns that give unprecedented access to people identities, emotions, and social character. What happens for Crawford and Campolo describing this paper is that there is an epistemic gap that creates some epistemic blindness. On one side, there is the machine, which is able to enact really accurate predictions. And on the other, there is the human capacity to interpret the principle that the machine uses to enact a decision, which is very limited. So as the reasoning of the machine defies human understanding, this pushes humans, us, to really recur to the tropes of enchantment, magic, or alchemy, while at the same time, it actually produces very tangible effects in the world, which are highly determined. So it is a lethal combination. Enchantment on one side shields from accountability, determinism on the other intensifies the processes of control and classification. Still, it's a very powerful discourse. It is seductive, it is ambiguous, and it opens up to a rhetoric of artificial intelligence as a superhuman cognition. Now, from an epistemological point of view, what artificial intelligence does is a process that they call irrational rationalization that flattens very complex social context and realities into signals as clear as possible for the purpose of predictive analytics. And crucially, this is a process that dispenses with causality in favor of correlation, as is well known. Very large data sets are analyzed to detect patterns in a nonlinear way. So knowledge is produced not through the cause-effect principle that we find so intuitive and familiar, but through correlation. So that even minimal changes to data input, for instance, imagine a very small change in pixels, which is meaningless to a human observer, can cascade in huge variation increases, so that the machine achieves great accuracy, but the wrong accuracy in ways that become then difficult to control. For instance, the way in which facial recognition is used to ascribe sexual preferences or deciding whether someone will commit a crime or not. These computational processes based on correlation don't reflect the world, they shape it, deepening contested classifications, inequalities, and hierarchies. They have a human bias baked in. So conceptualizing this operation in enchanted terms, and there is also a cultural history of technology and enchantment to consider, is therefore problematic because it positions them outside of critique, outside of accountability, and also obscures that what machines do is mathematical optimization at scales that, yes, are beyond human capacity to understand, but nevertheless, it is a matter of data compression and statistics. And that's why it's also important to really reflect on what do we think about when we think about data. And often we may think of that. We think about the cloud, but actually data is this huge amount of server farms. A little, the ambiguity also comes from the original meaning of the word data, as we know from datum, that means what is given. And this describes what exists beyond any argument, as something which is objective and totally factual. The problem is that data in computational sense is not given, but captured. Literally, it is extracted through computation, and yet it retains its original meaning of something that is given and appears to be objective. This distortion gives rise to what we can call data essentialism. So the idea that data are the essence of knowledge making. It becomes also data orthodoxy. So the idea that everything is made of data and data flows, the data are the building block of both computers and humans. Computers can be modeled on the human brain and so on. Now, from thinking that everything is data to the idea that data give us an objective picture of the world, and to say that by controlling data we can predict the future is a very small step, which also takes us into data behaviorism, the notion that we can produce understanding about future preferences and behaviors relying on data, and also take us into a very strange territory of dataism and even data mysticism. What is clear is that a new form of objectivity and a new regime of truth seem to be emerging. As recursive systems seem to respond in real time to real data, the norms according to which they calculate and predict behaviors also seem to emerge from reality itself. And Matteo Pasquinelli, who is another media theorist working on theory of computation, vividly describes this scenario as a statistical hallucination. So when we talk about data, actually, what we really mean is information, literally data that has been given a form, a binary form. Data don't just exist, they are generated. And in this sense, the data are human social artifacts, are a designed artifact. And nevertheless, this new data-driven immanence is producing a shift in what counts as knowledge and rationality. Phenomena are no longer understood by causality, but through correlation, as we have seen, and also through induction. So not by searching for their causes, but by trying to predict their occurrences. As causality dissipates in numbers and objects of knowledge are continuously reassembled in real time by the fine-tuning of machine learning models, what is happening is that the time we dedicate to decision-making, also through reflection, pause, slowness, hesitancy, ambiguity, and contradiction seems to evaporate and seems to be eliminated as useless. Lived experience is captured instantly. There is no mediation. And this is what the philosopher Antoinette WRHI described as the process of algorithmic governmentality, a type of anormative and apolitical rationality founded on the automated collection, aggregation, and analysis of big data so as to model, anticipate, and preemptively affect possible behavior. This is the regime that engineers our microsensibility almost at the pre-individual, pre-cognitive stage. Think, for example, at how each notification that you receive shoves your body into an automatic response. Each ping that we receive is an algorithmically generated, designed artifact that demands an instant reply from our body, first of all, and from us as a user conditioned to invest attention accordingly. This behavior is not entirely intentional nor conscious. It seems to take place at another level, which is almost pre-conscious and precognitive. For media theorist Mark Hansen, this is a calculative ontology of prediction that enframes our experience so that our tendencies, our propensities for living and being in existence are pre-designed. And this is where Fazzi's notion of the incommensurable we have just seen becomes relevant, because when computational processes occur within temporal frames that are incommensurable to the perceptual scale of human experience and can modulate our effects outside our direct perception, then we've already entered the pre-personal mode of contact with the techno-media environment, which is not fully human. And this micro-computational capture, expansion, and redistribution of sensibility at the precognitive level happens before we register this mechanism below the threshold of our sentience. So forthcoming behaviors become predicted not simply before they happen, but before we might even think of making them happen. Basically, what might happen becomes what will happen. And this, for WRHI, is precisely the target of algorithmic governmentality, the capture of potential, the inactual potential dimension of human existence, what we could do, the agency. By capturing attention and by orienting behavior, algorithmic governmentality anticipates what the body could do rather than what the people are actually doing. Notice the difference. And in this sense, it really captures flows of potential. So I'm no longer the sum of all the potential that makes me into an unpredictable horizon of event. I become a selected quantification of that potential available for capture. So how do we sort of resist this modulation of our sensibility? And to quote Pasquinelli, how do we emancipate ourselves from a data-centric view of the world? A good place to start is certainly the language we use. As many of the scholars I've been mentioning argue, there is nothing artificial nor intelligent in artificial intelligence. Even machine learning, it's not a machine that learns, but a machine that can do powerful operation of mathematical minimization. The language is important because it reinforces mythologies, myth-making processes. The technology is autonomous, but also mystifies and hides the extractivist and exploitative nature of digital labor, while also hiding the geopolitical autonomy of high-tech companies. And one of the best definition of what artificial intelligence actually is come from Kate Crawford in this book she just published called The Atlas of AI. And she says, artificial intelligence is both embodied and material, made from natural resources, fuel, human labor, infrastructures, logistics, histories, and classifications. AI systems are not autonomous, rational, or able to discern anything without extensive computationally intensive training with large data sets or predefined rules and rewards. In fact, artificial intelligence as we know it depends entirely on a much wider set of political and social structures. And due to the capital required to build AI at scale and the ways of seeing that it optimizes, AI systems are ultimately designed to serve existing dominant interest. In this sense, artificial intelligence is a registry of power, which I think is a really pertinent definition. And this is why Pasquinelli and Euler propose to secularize artificial intelligence from the ideological status of intelligent machine to one of instrument of knowledge magnification, which, like all instrument, has inbuilt bias. This secularization involves also considering data not as the given word, but as a partial translation sample of the word. It also involves to see AI not as superior form of cognition, but rather, they suggest, as a sophisticated form of perception that can do sophisticated pattern recognition, which is not the same thing as thinking. But it also means, more broadly, not to lose track of one of the key limitations of artificial intelligence, which is its inability to actually foresee the occurrence of the new, the genuine novelty in Deleuze's sense of the genuine innovation and even the anomaly of the virtual event that remains undetected because it doesn't fit patterns extracted from past behaviors. Predictive models, as we know, are built on the past, and prediction is nothing but a regeneration of the old according to the formula when, then. So, on the ground of this, let's perhaps circle back to the opening question: how do we do critique and how do we do critical practice in algorithmic age? We have seen that causality and deductive rationality are cast aside in favor of correlation and inductive data harvesting. So how do we think? How do we stay critical and resist capture? One way is to pay attention to another mode of thinking, which is open-ended, speculative, and abductive. Luciana Parisi, in this book, Inventive Methods, describe abduction as the process of inventing exploratory hypotheses formulated in an interrogative manner. It is a method of investigation which is not constrained by a priori theory or by a posteriori verification, and instead is attuned to the unpredictable nature of fact, thoughts, and experience. So it's really about the immanent relation between something and its unknown potential. In other words, abduction is highly speculative, but also requires imagination because it takes imagination as a key component of thinking and is about leaning into what doesn't exist yet and uses uncertainty to make knowledge. And this for me is important because concern ways of approaching an epistemology of uncertainty. Now, we all know about uncertainty and the uncertainty principle by German physicist Werner Heisenberg. You cannot measure both the position and the velocity of an object because the act of observing and attempting to measure something will alter what is observed. What is less explored, perhaps, is how we can work productively with uncertainty and use it as a material to make knowledge. And I'm going to share briefly two possible ways of doing so. The first one concerns the idea of negative knowledge. Epistemologist of science Karin Knorr-Cetina writes, negative knowledge is not non-knowledge. It is knowledge of the limits of knowing. It points towards doing threshold work, working on liminal object as a way of making meaning. Study something on the basis of what that thing is not. An example, for instance, is to study the divine in terms of what the divine is not, or in some areas of experimental high energy physics, negative knowledge is incorporated into research on liminal phenomena. On the fringe of what has been decided, it is the primary object of research interest. So it is about really the awareness of the limit of what we research. Another way of dealing with uncertainty comes from a very different disciplinary domain, come from the extraordinary, for me, Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg, who treats history like a forensic science. And his method is about making conjecture. This is a mode of knowledge production that really allows for chance and unpredictability and the uncertain to enter into the outcome. It really restores the uncertainty of the event into the past, examining unrealized possible futures. Ginzburg also uses this wonderful expression, elastic rigor, to really underline the paradoxical nature of this type of knowledge where outcomes emerge by allowing factors that are not fully measurable, but are really situated, ultimately a way of knowing what is not known. And the examples he offers are intuition, the tracking skills of the first hunters, divination, and the capacity to read the situation and infer future, leaping from the known to the unknown. And why this way of engaging with the unknown are important for us? Because I think methodologies and our methodologies of research must be really fine-tuned for the continuous rather than the discrete, for the uncertain, the volatile, and the turbulent unfolding of events, so that they're fit for more than human relationality and ecosystem, and allow us to tap into the invisible forces that traverses us and make up the becoming of the world, because the world is not static. And it's also concerning how do we overcome the limitation of methodologies, both qualitative and quantitative, which often are set of devices that reduce uncertainty. Post-qualitative inquiry, on the other hand, concern process, becoming, and what is not there yet, what is uncertain, unformed, what is immanent. And what characterizes post-qualitative inquiry is not trying to recognize an epistemic object, what is already known. It concerns how to look for the conditions of emergence of what comes to be the new. So in this approach, we are less interested in what is and more interested in what might be, what might emerge, like this frog. And this is exactly what algorithmic governmentality insists on capturing. And that's why I argue our methodology should really go in this way. This type of inquiry doesn't exist before is object of research. It always begins with the encounter with the word. And actually, for Elizabeth St. Pierre that writes about this, method itself can be considered a sort of trap. But what matters here is that even the notion of an external observer is no longer tenable. Everything we do as researchers is already an integral part of the process of knowledge building. And therefore, expressions such as raw data and the real world becomes a little misleading, because they imply the fiction of a world of objects and stuff out there to be harvested for analysis, upon which intervene as researchers. And instead, it is in the encounter with the becoming of the world that an uncertain knowledge might emerge, a space in between the unknowing and the coming to know. And this is a space where we can move away from data as empirical evidence parsed into measurable packets, and instead attune ourselves to intensities whose impact is not only unexpected and uncertain, but sometimes it also unrepresentable. And this is where the unruliness of the potential, what might be, becomes also a resistance to capture and to coding. So I'm going to just leave you with some questions to process. How do we contrast the algorithmic maneuvers that call potential and turn it into probable, that turns what might be into what will be? How do we recraft and redesign potential? All those might be, could be, and maybes that are implicit in situations that algorithmic governmentality tries to capture. Can the human-machine encounter be redesigned on the ground of productive uncertainty? And can uncertainty itself be used as a creative material to resist reduction? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betti. It's quite of an ending. And it's a pain to have to keep all the questions that I have, and I think the audience have, but also a pleasure to have the second keynote for today, continuing this conversation. Derrick de Kerckhove. Welcome, Derrick, again.
Thank you.
Professor de Kerckhove is a guru, I would say, in the world of new media. And beyond the many appointments in different universities all around the world, is also a visiting researcher here at the design department of Politecnico di Milano. His own research along the years has been moving around the communication and media with a background in sociology in particular. And lately he has been working on the concept of digital twin, which is just the beginning of what he will talk about today. So, Derrick, I'll leave you the stage. I hope we have been able to solve the technical issue for sharing your screen.
No, we haven't. But I'm sending you.
I'm sorry.
Linda and Manuela the thing, because that's the only way it works. It simply doesn't respond to my request. So, you know, as I said, the goddess of technology is not very fond of me. So the personal
no worries.
The PDT, I call it. And so you'll be receiving it in no time, I hope. In any case, while it gets there and you can establish it, I can say a few things about what lovely things I've just heard Betti talk about. We get along on so many counts, but I come from a different angle, and that's very useful, quite complementary. First of all, the planetary vision computation is, for me, the encounter of the next ground of culture, which is going to be quantum. We've seen the shift of the ground, of literate ground, that we were, you know, I was born in. You probably not, but I certainly was born in the literate ground. And it has its own language. The literate ground is based on meaning. And that's the way I go about it. I just say, moving from the literate ground to the digital one, to the algorithmic one, in fact, because of algorithms, we lose meaning. We can recover it through algorithm, we can rebuild it, there's all kind, but the practice of algorithm is actually excluding meaning as the dominant feature of the ground. Whereas meaning and the production of meaning is a dominant feature of literacy. And then the next ground, which is of course the quantum ground, and we are now in fact in quantum ground the way we were about digital ground in, I'd say, around the early 90s. We can see the development of technologies, we can see the understanding of where it's going, we can see, so we can sort of predict from your last statement, you know, moving from the unknown to the possible. Yes, we can really predict now that that's where we're going, because we have seen developments like this and they are much accelerated today. So that's the thing that I wanted to say. I also have been dealing with the digital unconscious as opposed to the technological unconscious. everything that's known about you that you don't know, and that has almost as much power on your life as Mr. Freud's or Mr. Jung's. So these are things. I was fascinated to know that Guattari talked about three ecologies, because my last book, I didn't read that book, and my last book was the three ecologies of the quantum ecology being the third one. And so that I have to go to read that book immediately. So what else did I have? There's so many wonderful things that. Tell me when you're ready, Manuela or Analinda. Oh, there we are. You are ready. Well, there we are. Anyway, we may have a chance to talk more with Betti, because it's really pretty rich stuff. I'm glad that she talked about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, because I think entanglement and uncertainty are the features of the next round. And so it's really interesting to take uncertainty not so much as the lack of knowledge, but as a structural element of being itself. Whatever is, you can call the whole thing being. Well, that's what uncertainty is all about. That's what Heisenberg really had in mind. So I'm coming to a specific issue here, the design of the digital twin, the whole because it was about a designer presentation, so obviously I focused particularly on that, but I'm going to give a preparation to, you can move to the next slide. So yeah, more than human. The thing about humans is that they were discovered or invented by the ancient Greeks. And the notion of human is entirely dependent on literacy. It's the beginning of literacy. Philosophy comes from the possibility of being able to write. But being human, and particularly being human in a Western way, is given by the possibility of internalizing information, data, whatever you call it, and building an internal person from learning to read and write. And of course, you can oppose that immediately to the fact that today, that internal reality is externalized, and we'll go in some detail to that, externalized and invaded. Invaded by what? By the algorithm that we just heard Betti talk about. So there's a fabulous and formidable exchange between the internal and the external that's happening today in terms of being human. And of course, the very process that allowed the Greeks to invent human was recovered during the Renaissance, because the Renaissance was based on actually expanding the power of literacy by making it printed. Next. We're already much more than humans. Here's something which is, that's some of this is exaggerated. That means we are moving ahead of we're moving into the possible. Brain stimulator to beat disorders like depression and Parkinson's, ear implants for super hearing, brain chip to improve multitasking and happiness. I like it. I thought this is very naive, but also fun to see. Augmented eyes. I like this the best. Augmented eyes that can detect liars. So we have enormous powers now. And these powers, we've seen them coming just driving a car or motorcycle. It's a huge power by comparison of the limitation that we had. We don't have to go to digital culture to have been expanded. And while mechanical powers are reasonably easy to learn, manage, and sort of control, we're not to that point yet with digital powers. And so that's why the law is lagging. The law is lagging to put those powers under control, and leaves us with not the kind of responsibility that we have sort of painfully learned to have towards mechanical tools. Next slide. The culture that's on its way it's happening all the time. It's very, very rapid. It keeps producing new things, and I don't need to point that much more. But what it does is changing the ground of human experience from literacy to digital culture. This disrupting all establishments and all assumption about what it is to be human. to the point of raising questions about whether it is still necessary to hang on to humanism. And I was very interested about the mention made by Betti several times about the epistemological issues, the ontological epistemological issues that the digital culture is bringing on. I see it as an epistemological crisis. I see that what's happening today with fake news and everything is the loss of power of meaning. It's the loss of structure of meaning. And it is precisely because meaning is not invoked as a dominant feature of communication in algorithms that people are trusting it ever less and less, or accept. I call it the loss of the referent. You know, the semiotic triangle is built on the signifier, which is whatever it is that's making meaning. The signified, which is what happens to your mind when you actually have seen the signifier. And that's fine, but you also need the referent. And the referent is what tells you that whatever you have understood from the signifier actually does exist in reality, or at least is known by most people as something that exists either in a fictional or in a real way in reality. Well, you know, Mr. Trump could make any statement he wanted. All he had to do was to have a signifier that led to a signified, and nobody cared about finding about the referent. This is what's happening, and it is an epistemological crisis that we are experiencing right now. It's not bad news. I mean, it sounds like a terrible news, and it is difficult, but it is good news to the extent that we are shifting the whole culture. First, is being globalized, which is an enormous shift in itself. But we are shifting to other processing way of organizing human life and existence. It's you know, it may be somehow difficult to do the transition. It was a horrible transition to do it in the Renaissance. 200 years of religious wars to just graduate to the literate privacy, to the freedom of consciousness and all these things. People were killing each other. So it's important to know that when you go from one medium to another, it doesn't go easy. And we've seen already things that don't go easy going from the literate to the digital culture. We've seen new religious wars, different religions, and still religions which are very close that fight against each other. God knows why they have to be fighting, considering how close they are. But the point is, that is the disruption that the epistemological crisis actually brings on. We just can hope that because things are a lot faster than they used to be, that it won't take 200 years. That's something that sort of you'd like to see. Next slide. So clearly we can see, this doesn't require a great deal of discussion, but you can see that the evolution converges on digitization, design, manufacturing, all forms of connectivity, operation, innovation. We keep inventing things all the time. Now we're very big into big data, augmented reality, additive manufacturing, cloud computing, cybersecurity. All these things are keywords of what is an established environment that is bringing on the digital transformation and making it the new medium in which we occupy the medium. It's the convergence of all these various innovations that are bringing it to the fore. Whereas the previous medium was creating, distributing information in libraries in various places. The new medium makes you the access or the interface to any information, which is a huge difference. Next. So the new ground is quite unconsciously developed. We are aware of all of these changes, but we don't realize that they do much more than simply bringing services. When people talk about the digital transformation, they naturally assume that it's a business problem, that you can improve your manufacturing or your managing your troops. It's much more than that. It actually externalizes internal faculties. The very thing that allowed to put our mind, behind some kind of protection verified by the Spanish Inquisition. You had to torture the body to get into the mind because the mind was becoming free from access. And so the same story as Prometheus attached to his rod, who says, my mind is close to Zeus. I am a free person because my mind is free. That was a discovery of Aeschylus and a discovery of the ancient Greeks. They were introducing this mind. But now we are externalizing the contents. We're externalizing the contents of our memory. Sure, we don't externalize the process of memory, although we mechanize it. Intelligence is served by Alexa and Bixby and all these digital assistants, which are, by the way, the model towards which the personal digital twin is going. Imagination too. Think about augmented reality or virtual reality, or putting Google Glass on, or goggles, in order to literally have your iris to the iris of the digital culture, just eye to eye, so to speak. We have externalized our imagination, starting with Second Life. And so that's a very extraordinary thing, because externalizing imagination and occupying that externalized, I mean, we started externalizing imagination from the time we invented photography. But then we moved on to cinema, and then we moved on to TV, and then we moved on to all the possible screens. But this externalizing, in fact, is not leaving intact what was inside before. So we've got an extraordinary change, a sort of profound epistemological change within our own setup. Then, of course, we're now redoubling humans. And we're redoubling humans in two ways, either by having characters like the personal digital twin, supported by life logging. Life logging is beginning to become an industry. We can redouble our whole experience by recording it, carrying sufficient, storing device, petabytes or more, to know what we have been doing at every moment of our lives. 5G is doing something else, and it's a very, I mean, it sounds like it's just a better thing than 4G. We know it works differently. It works by layers instead of working by general signal, sort of total surround signal. And it's very instant and so on. But the most important part of 5G, and will probably be repeated in 6 and 7 or whatever next will be invented, is the fact that it's a duplex. It goes both ways. So whenever you get close to these little units or cells, and you need to have a lot of those cells to make 5G possible, you're actually delivering your whole self, as well as you're getting whatever information you were looking for. And what's interesting about 5G is that you don't need, when 5G will be everywhere, you won't even need a password anymore for anything, because your password will be the follicles of your hair, could be your smell, your mere presence is you. And as you recognize, so this kind of very intimate connection with this huge digital environment is also on its way. So the idea now is, of course, to integrate, connect cognitively first and emotionally, I suppose, cyberspace and physical space. Now, what I find the most interesting thing in terms of what I've studied in the history of the alphabet, as I could see the gradual internalization of a self, that is, that something that you have at the core of yourself, that is the point of decision. And it can be inside your head, can be in your chest, could be in your feet. But the fact it's somewhere inside your body. Once you have a digital twin to which you delegate all these things, all the externalized faculties, then you have a decentering, an externalizing not only of faculties, but also of your core, the core being. And I find that actually, is something that I can see happening. I don't know how threatening it is. We certainly need to design our digital twin very, very well in order to be able to handle that one. Next slide. So moving into cyberspace, shift to cyberspace, the point of having yourself represented by a digital twin, which is your personal representation, is that properly managed, it can help you to handle the content of cyberspace, both by having superb data analytics, and of course having access to anything that is relevant at the time of need for whatever purpose. So you have this kind of moving. When I say moving into cyberspace, there is this tendency. We're dragged into it. We're dragged into it by having put the finger forward, the whole body follows, I would say. At first, we were just very happy to be able to do our email. And then gradually, we were very happy to share our experience with other people with our social media. And then we were very happy also to have Alexa take decisions for us. And so this is what I think is really interesting, is that moving in cyberspace is actually being dragged into it. But it's also a way by which we become more than human, superhuman, in fact, having instant access to huge number crunching systems, data analytics, and all the data you possibly need. I'm totally amazed. I mean, yesterday, I'll give you an example, it's really incredible. Yesterday, I couldn't close my car with the electric key. And I was desperate and I didn't know what to do. I had to dump my car somewhere outside in the street and I couldn't shut it. So I was worried about people, people in these are kind of lightheaded about things. Well, you know what? I went online. I said, how does one recharge an electric key for a Audi? And within seconds, not only did I find the information, I actually did what I needed to do in order to actually be able to close my car, which I did this morning. Nobody had stolen anything. But such a puny little thing, accessible to a sort of, modest person like myself, it was just astounding. And that's exactly what I mean. You have a decentered self, your personal digital twin, in cyberspace, finding for you right away, before you have to fiddle-faddle with your computer, the kind of answers that are very, very urgent. Next slide. So tightening the connection between, the physical and the digital twin, and finding a seamless interaction. The idea would be that you would have within cyberspace the same speed and freedom of thought with infinitely more content than you have within your own head. And this could really happen. It's sort of happening, but there is too many intermediate steps that you have to take in order to get there. But so I can see this, how to best negotiate cyberspace. Next. So augmented humans are the new players. They have a physical augmentation, a sensorial one, ultrasensorial. Different kinds of technologies allow you to actually augment your perception. You can have an exoskeleton to give you more resilience, cognitive augmentation, access to distributed knowledge, ambient interaction, access to supplemental reasoning. So you have systems now that are semi-autonomous, that actually make decisions for you if you are working in some industrial environment. I've been working for 6 years now with the IEEE International Engineering Organization on symbiotic autonomous systems. And we have devoted 2 white papers on the digital twin. And I can put that as reference if people are interested in pursuing this sort of thing. But we started with technology, and we started with mechanical technology and the duplicating of, expensive machines or construction systems, and eventually got to humans because of medical research. Medical research is extremely interested in duplicating an individual because every individual is different. And the more you know about that person, the better you can cure that person. And the more you know about that person, the better you can know about much larger groups within a certain area. COVID has certainly been a push into discovering more and more people in terms of medical research. Next. Next slide. Okay, but there are critical issues. So the shift to cyberspace requires managing complexity and actually remaining pertinent. How do you develop your mediation entity? the machine learning that you can actually introduce and that people do introduce. The first digital assistant that introduced machine learning was Alexa. Then it was followed by Siri and followed by the others. But that machine learning allows to accelerate considerably the pertinence or increase the pertinence of the offered services and so on. I have been in touch with a group in Japan, the NTT Research Digital Twin Research Group, and it's quite interesting. They are very forward in their estimation of what one can do, such as reproducing the psychological content. Of course, the physiological information is quite easy to reproduce. Social information, it's already there in your social media and your email. Ability models, psychological behavior, environmental information. They are putting all of this together. And so managing this through something like what I said before, a life log. The question will be, of course, establishing dialogue. We know of already very strong systems that either through generate generative adversarial network, what's called GAN, can actually rapidly come to the right answer to the specific question. We have GPT-3, the new little marvel of artificial intelligence. By the way, thank you, Betti, for reminding us that there is neither artificial nor intelligence in artificial intelligence. We are fully aware of that. Even our own intelligence, the human one, is actually could be called artificial because it is the produce of the alphabet. It's produce of a technology. But anyway, that we can discuss that. So autonomous behavior, autonomous world modeling, that is, how do you actually relate both yourself and your digital twin to the environment? How do you create a situation where the environment dictates the best possible behavior in such and such circumstance? In a very accelerated way, you can see that with self-driving cars. Autonomous vehicles are being dictated by their environment, by the roadway, by what happens on site, as to how to behave. You'll find that this is going to be practiced also on the behavior of people. Next slide. One of my colleagues in Novosibirsk, and I hope she is actually watching, Nina Panina, has made a very good bunch of questions. You can see on the right a rather amusing speculation about what the digital twin will actually become, all the way to 2000. First of all, it was an avatar, but if you go to 2045, there is a mind transfer into a holographic body. Wow. Well, maybe we'll have to wait another 25, 23, 4 years to that. But still, it's a lot of speculation, and I take it easy. But Nina is saying something which is important. She says, how reliable are the personality simulation outcome? Because it's purely hypothetical. And as far as she's concerned, life logging isn't enough. There is no possibility of real self-reflection in a PDT, personal digital twin. And I like this suggestion that the personal digital twin is not free to make mistakes. It's not capable of conscious creativity. So there are all kinds of issues that we have to explore, and that it really concerns designers. Ethical, and I'll get back to those, privacy issues, ownership issues, security, legal, and also what do you do with a digital twin when the physical one is gone forever? And then another question is, do we really need a full personality representation that, rather than a case by case or a category of activities by category representation? What kind of configuration do we want to give our digital twin? Next slide. So what is the future for digital twin? Of course, mirroring the person's physiology, monitoring the person's health parameters, monitoring the environment, assessing behavioral risk, and swarm intelligence for social benefit. The actually interesting thing about swarm intelligence and the multiplication of digital twins is being practiced already by the Swedish Center for Research on Digital Twins. It's already an established research center. And what they do, they will take one particular profile of the digital, sort of medical digital twin of a patient, and then multiply it. It costs nothing. Once you've got the first one, you can simply multiply it by a push of a button, and try different medication in case of a complex disease or bad reaction to vaccination, that happens, and try it on all these and find out where it seems that the medication is actually working best. So you can see that industrial and medical applications are very much on the way. Next slide. So what are enabling technologies? You can embed knowledge of the object or the person, record the history of the object throughout the life cycle. Then they provide contextual and historical knowledge, can be used as a proxy for the object knowledge, can be applied to human knowledge by mirroring a person's know-how and skills. And all of the issues are to keep the synchronization. And IBM is working on it, on the multimodal digital twin. And it is very keen on its already existing Watson computer that is the one that has, I think, I'm not sure if Watson won the chess game or the Go game. I'm not sure which was Watson. But anyway, Watson is very much involved in building the digital twin and the knowledge graph of the specific person that they are using as a model. Next. So knowledge and emotional representation. This is back to the NTT research. Mind reading, whole brain emulation. Whole brain emulation has its acronym. It's WBE, but it's not very far in its. Neither is mind reading, but there is mind reading on the way. It is possible. One of the technologies that they use is to study the movement of the neck to be able to decode subvocalization. So not everybody uses subvocalization to read, but you and I do. Not every time, but sometimes if I'm reading something a little bit complicated and I'm slightly tired, I will do subvocalization. That prevents me from being a speed reader, by the way. But mind reading can be done by studying the little movements that happen here and then translating those, and then, of course, using artificial intelligence to decode it with a 95% accuracy, which is pretty extraordinary. Then there are two things: to your brain to computer interfaces and computer to brain interfaces. Brain to computer interfaces are pretty stronger. The other one is more, thank goodness, more complicated, because the other one is really dangerous. Brain to computer interfaces allows you, for example, to think looking at a screen and move objects on that screen, make choices. It's very helpful for people who are paraplegics. And there's all kinds of good things done with it, and artists are very interested in using it. I've seen my first brain-to-computer interface back in 25 years or 30 years ago. It was called IBVA, Interactive Brainwave Visual Analyzer, and it allowed you to make changes onto a screen or actually create sound. The most beautiful thing was an arena. It was an artist called Ulrike Gabriel, and I wish I had shown you an image of this. She had an arena on the floor with little robots which had photosynthetic cells on their back, and above the arena was a light well. And by thinking, you could increase, using IBVA, you could increase the amount of light that came from the well, which would fall on the little robots and activate those robots. And these little robots would actually run on, they would cross wires, which created sound. So the robots, and there were about 5 or 6 of them, and they were trained not to hit each other. And so your thinking increased power for little contraptions to actually combine to make music for you, which of course would come back to your ears and allow you to continue. I thought that it was an extraordinary thing. It was such a wonderful thing to be done by an artist. Well, that's a typical brain-to-computer interaction. So you can see that there is a lot of things that can be done taking that direction. I'm bringing in the Inquisition question because, of course, the Inquisition question is what I was mentioning before. Today, you can get into somebody's head without having to torture the body and do it in a much smoother way. So yes, you can very much deal with knowledge representation in a digital twin. What the Japanese show, which is very interesting. First of all, there is a long track record of being interested in things like Tamagotchis and robots and so on. The Japanese do not have the same preventions against robotics than maybe many people in the West have. But more than anything else, the Japanese, as well as the Chinese and many people in Asia, put community over individuality. And it makes sense because they did not go through the literate, the literacy ground. And so for them, there is most of the time much more emphasis put on the harmony and benefit to the community than the way Western people who have been more individualized, of course, developed their own technology. Next slide. Well, that's fine. I didn't realize I was going to get to design issues right away. Something else is going to come up for sure. So how to seize the opportunity? Of course, the digital twin is an extraordinary opportunity. You can have it at many scales of development. It can be done in a very simple manner with in your cell phone. I'll show you an example. And all the way to what's done by a group called Ono, who are making in Japan the full representation of persons. So there's a whole range of possibilities. And you can see here, this is done by my students at the Politecnico Institute. They 2 years ago or 3 years ago developed this graph in order to show what you would have to have in mind. And for those who will do some research on this in this workshop, you can actually see better than I can. It's kind of small print. But then you have the physical twin here, the digital twin with all the services there. You have to deal with money. You have to deal with legal issues, work environment, health issues. You can have even a sort of a digital psychiatrist helping you. All that you can study individually during your workshop. But I think it's important to ask students to do that because they are fresher to deal with these problems. You have technical problems, you have psychological issues, you have social issues and ethical ones, and we're going to see a few of those. Next slide. So this is a wonderful thing by, this is a man who said that his personal digital twin was already in his smartphone. And he's called Philip Stylwick, and he has actually a company that uses artificial intelligence in order to synchronize activities for industry, for example, of hydraulics. Some plants need very complex hydraulics management, and he decided to apply the software that he and his team had developed to deal with hydraulics. So this is really very humble. To putting together all the things that could be relevant for the digital twin and how you would bring an integrated information using health data, finance, travel, and social data. Well, I don't know why. This is something that was done last year. I don't know why we don't have on the market yet some clever system that is going to fetch in your smartphone whatever you can coordinate and correlate in order to come up with a bunch of answerable questions. You can actually ask your smartphone to be even smarter and go well beyond Alexa or your digital assistant because it goes directly to the information that is pertinent to you. I suppose it would take some time to get that, and that's why we don't have it yet. Next slide. So living with a digital twin, using the digital twin as interface, various possibilities, again, from the Japanese group, proxy meetings between digital twins. This is the level at which you begin to not connect only with your own digital twins, but your twin deals with your companion's twin or your friend's twin, your collaborators in a, your colleagues' twins. And as far as the Japanese are concerned, the twins of everybody, they are hoping that everybody will have a twin. The twins of everybody will be managing for everybody, for the harmony of everybody, the handling of city decision, urban planning, and things like that. So creating a personal agent to act on your behalf, enabling fictional dialogue. Yeah, replica is losing favor right now for city things, but GPT-3 continues to be very pertinent because it's a predictive language development system that you may have already heard of. It's extremely powerful, and it, within 2 or 3 prompts, gives you as close as Wikipedia could or Google could an answer, but it's not an answer that is pre-existing, it's an answer that is created by the system. Elon Musk has put several $1 million into the thing so that it moved from acting on 75 billion parameters to 175 billion parameters, which means that instantly, within all the categories that you have accessible online, you could go and get the information that is the most pertinent, the most coherent to respond to these 3 or 4 prompts. Now that's what I mean by your digital twin being inside cyberspace, using technologies like GPT-3 to have, as lightning speed, answers to questions that there is no way you'd be able to get just sitting in front of your computer. So this is a pretty powerful thing. And of course, you see this enabling consensus. It's important in Japan to create that consensus. Next slide. This is the long-term project. You can study it at leisure. We've already seen the mind-to-mind, translating sensitivity and psychological decoding, creating another me. That's the purpose of the thing. Memory adaptive agent, experience information that comes from the life log. And then this idea of the future society, modeling crowd behavior. I hope it's not going to become the sort of a Japanese version of the handmaiden tale, but you can model crowd behavior in this context and nobody feels anything about it. And crowd data, real-time crowd data assimilation, equilibrium simulation also, coupling water, energy, and other sources, economic resources, and autonomous economic system. We need one right now in a post-COVID situation, and then a global environmental system. So this is a very strong plan. They have written to me that they are willing to collaborate with our international team on digital twin. So I'm looking very much forward because they are bringing this sort of community angle that was not very present in my previous group. Next slide. And so that's where they express the digital twin society of the future. It's extremely ambitious, and even probably because I'm too individualist myself, I have a little bit of difficulty of figuring out how are they going to do it? How can you harmonize the immense differences between the characteristics of everybody? I mean, what are the elements of digital twin that are going to be used so that the harmonization is possible? So a multimodal modeling, living culture, crops, water, energy, resources, natural environment, urban environment, industrial society, economy, and society. All of this is in the plans. And all of this is geared towards an artificial society that doubles. So we don't have a digital twin just of a person, but of a society. Now, this is not entirely exclusive to Japan because the European Union, the director of the DigiConnect section of the European Union, Roberto Viola, has talked about making a digital twin of Europe. And that would mean going to a similar thing, that is to be able to regulate better the flow of people and goods and funds and so on that is happening in any economy. So it's kind of an interesting echo of two different cultures looking at the social aspects of digital twinning. Next. So IBM has this idea of the cities of the future: awareness through cyberspace, cooperative working, citizen mood, sentiment analysis, and social scoring. That brings to mind, of course, social credits, which is another community-driven innovation, very algorithmic, totally algorithmic to be sure. And we saw an image of Black Mirror's Freefall, which was presented by Betti. You probably remember this way by which people are given credits for any kind of behavior they have socially, and that's how people can get control. The story of poor Lacey is harrowing, as you can remember, but it's very much what's happening in China, and people are being observed by cameras pretty well everywhere. Their cell phone is constantly sussed for information of what they're doing and where they are. And they are given, I think they start with 1,000 points, and they lose points if they cross the road against the red light. And whatever they do is judged and given value. And in some cases, you may not go on a train or on a plane, not only because you might have not behaved very well, but because of the company you keep. Because the people you know, or too many people you know, are not behaving well, so you are a suspect. So that's that's a handmaid's tale. It's a horrible thing, I think, and I don't know. I know that the West is doing the same thing, but in a much more, I would say, subtle way. We're being observed over time. We're being valued. When there is a need to be valued, all of us are being valued in the West, but it's not a policy. It's a matter of doing it without talking about it. If your government makes a decision that it's going to be done, that changes the whole relationship between people who are ruled and the rulers. And, it raises enormous questions. It may be justified in different cultures, as I said before, different approaches to people, but nevertheless, it's something we have to be aware of. Next slide. So what next? The digital twin, by any other name, is here to stay. It's already present in digital assistants and in our smartphones as devices to negotiate our relationship to digital and physical environment. Our internal self may not disappear entirely, but will not be private anymore and may be subservient to our external one. Our digital assistants may become our digital masters. They are getting there now. And that's not something we want to leave to government and corporations. And so Roberto Serracco, who is a member of our team, was writing, avatars are bound to become a more and more faithful representation of their physical counterpart. Embedded with the person's digital twin, they might share memories and the character of the person they are impersonating. Next slide. Yes, I added this because I wanted us to also consider constitutional matters, because the 5G integration of personal, social, and social brings together total surround, total context, total surveillance, and total control. Even in the context of a Western civilization, it is important to know that we have actually some counter protection, that in fact our digital twins are protected. So we have to work on a constitutional thing. Next slide. And one person has done this, it's Alan Brooke. It hasn't caught on, but it is at least one thing that is being done today in order to come up with some kind of regulation. The Human State Foundation, as a modern individual, you are composed of two intimately connected but materially distinct parts, your traditional bodily presence and your technology-enabled digital extended presence. And here we're not dealing with the digital twin as such. We're just dealing with all that digital unconscious that we carry around us, like a sort of a transparent shadow, our extended digital presence. The human state is landless, proto-state that provides your digital extended presence with citizenship, security, and essential services in a permanent home. Next slide. As a modern technological individual, your digital presence has become an integral part of who you are and what you do. Its well-being is vital for and inseparable from your well-being in the classical sense, your physical and financial security, your social and professional standings, your privacy and freedoms, and your legacy. It touches on almost every aspect of your life. As such, this digital presence, or what we can more generally call your modern extended present, has developed needs that parallel those of your physical reality. And it needs the same kind of protection. Next slide. The human rights. I don't like the word human very much, but that's what he decided. The rights to rights. That's absolutely fundamental. The rights to perpetual security and growth. The rights to autonomy, with some kind of, I would say, control. The right to migration, migration to where? I would like to have more information on that. The right to privacy, if it's going to be as effective as the right to privacy that we have, it's going to go nowhere. I think people are dreaming about privacy. As Zuckerberg said now 7 or 8 years ago, privacy is over. Get over it. The right to a constitution, and I think that's really very much key. Next. And then again, what about these rights? Nature versus technology, which is very much in the next ground, our future ground, the ground of the quantum technology ground. It's something that will be much closer to what you see on the left than what you see on the right, although both contain the same kind of basic elements that connect us with the rest of nature, but something that we may discuss in yet another session. I also end up with a few questions, so the last two slides, I think. So the question to explore, I think, is what content should the digital twin have in terms of memory and analytics? Should one's personal digital twin be split into separate categories and services, or present themselves as a single entity? And I'm of two minds about these things. Should there be one or more personal digital twin? Those who remember, and they have a good memory, Second Life will remember that some people had 5 or 6 avatars. It's hard enough to actually, manage one. How could you manage 6? Well, the question is, part of my students said we should have more than one digital twin. If it was one for different functions, then we're back to the first question. But I'm not entirely sure we want to have the reproduction of ourselves doing all kinds of different things. Again, it's a question I have no answer for. The Swedish research group that uses the duplicate PDTs. And then, of course, the most important thing is what level of autonomy should the twin be allowed? And the last slide. Legal, ethical, security issues, for which purpose and to what extent should the PDT allow to negotiate purchases, contracts, etc.? What are the liabilities of both twins in case of a mishap, as has been questioned already with self-driving cars? And what protections can be guaranteed to PDT regarding hijacking, fraudulent use, hacking, identity theft, etc.? These are really very, very basic questions. There's a lot more to ask, and I'm sure in the discussion you'll be able to come up with better ones. Anyway, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Derrick. Thank you. The two of you, Derrick and Betti, opened up perfectly the complexity of the topic, both at the ontological level, making us reflecting on how we produce knowledge within design in relation to non-human entities, and in particular AI and data and algorithms. And so understanding which is the possible agency that this non-human entity do have, and which is the renewed agency of humans in this relationship between humans and non-humans. I would like to have Marco Quaggiotto and Davide Spallazzo from our team to serve us as discussant, as you have been discussing with them already the topic. So I leave them the duty, the pleasure, and also the challenge to manage the conversation now with our audience. Ciao Marco, ciao Davide, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Chiara. Davide, do you want to start? Should I start?
Please start, Marco.
Okay.
Right.
Obvious.
we didn't organize ourselves before. As Chiara was saying, well, thank you, of course, Betti and Derrick, for this wonderful couple of hours. It was very interesting, also very dense, I think. So there we have explored many topics, and each one of them should require probably a lesson of one afternoon. But there were a number of very interesting topics emerging with the relationship between humans and non-humans. And this is, of course, changing on multiple levels. As Betti was saying, we have the emergence of new actors that interact closely with humans. So the emergence of planetary computation, and we have further developments of the process of delegation of human processes to technological counterparties. And this, of course, introduces many new issues, both in our relationship between humans and non-humans, and in society. So we have this kind of anthropomorphization of technology. So we infuse, as Betti was saying, we infuse with intelligence, with autonomy, with rationality, systems and algorithms that are basically piles of math optimization problems and linear algebra and terabytes of data. And this leads to this kind of epistemological disconnect of which both of you have been talking about, in which the interpretation of non-human actors is led in human terms, and so at the same time we have this removal of human intervention from these digital systems. So we don't talk about how these digital systems are actually designed by humans, and the data is collected by humans, is curated by humans, has all the bias of the human actors. And of course, also the algorithms themselves are programmed by humans, which choose the objective function, as they call it in machine learning. So what the algorithm needs to learn and the parameters that regulate this learning. And of course, this whole issue brings extremely impactful consequences on society, which on one hand are that non-humans become actors in our society, which are perceived as autonomous with an agency that is becoming part of society. And on the other hand, humans become increasingly hybrid in terms of how they manage information and how they are part of society itself. So I think there are many themes that we can talk about, but I would leave space to questions at this point. I can ask a question if there are no further questions for the moment, or maybe Davide, do you want to say something related to them?
Actually, I have question more than things to say, because a lot of things have been said, all very interesting and also complex in a sort of let's say entanglement, just to use the word that Betti was using. Everything is going to have a sense and to be mixed. But I will try probably to make a question that is going to be for both the speaker, and it can bring close to the design field. I'm referring to one article that I read some years ago from Nesta that was talking about digital twins. And at that time, it was before 2020. They were, let's say, it's forecasting for the 2020 having digital twins already entering the market in a very, let's say, proper way. Let's say having digital twins well present in the market. And the title of the article was "No More What Ifs." So meet your digital twin. And I think that this is very crucial, because it's going to be on one side, coping with the matter of uncertainty that Betti was talking about. So what if we have no more what if in our design field? And I think this is a very crucial question. Are digital twins, or let's say artificial intelligence, a way for speculating on the future, or are they a way for framing uncertainty? So probably this could be a question for both the speakers, but also for the audience, for the PhD students, if they would like to answer. Probably there's no answer. Probably there are both, but it would be interesting to articulate a little bit more.
Can I just come in?
Go
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks, Derrick, because now I know everything I need to know about the digital twin, and I have a lot of questions for you as well. And that there is this fabulous complementarity and friction between our position, which I think is very healthy. Thanks, Marco, for the wonderful sum up. You said everything. And thanks, Davide, for this question. I would like to start by saying that, okay, what strikes me about the notion of digital twin, the way I have understood it so far, is that it seems to me to be framed through, and I speak from a philosophical perspective, of course, through a very humanities-led framework. It is a replication of the me, myself, and I, on the ground of augmenting, expanding human mastery. And it's not a coincidence that in one of your first slides there was the human, the Leonardo Vitruvian man, and that is the visual trope of the Renaissance, and this notion of the human as agent of their own destiny and life. Which is exactly what the discourses in the post-humanities is contesting, and it's been contesting for a while now. And I'm just wondering, which also goes back to Davide's point, how this position sit together or find some resonance together, because on one end you would have the total capture of potential and virtuality and the uncertainty, which is enacted through replication and replication of the same. And the word twin really tells me something about the sameness, and also makes me think about the evil twin, which is a side question. Okay. On the other hand, the insertion of the more than human, non-human, the inhuman even, will retain or perhaps help us work with the space of the alien, the unknown, the uncertain. And finally, my last point is it's our job to work with those two positions, especially bringing together eclectic teams with philosopher, computer scientists, designers together.
Can I answer to that? I think this is great. I think you're right, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I was going to say something even more in your question, that perhaps the digital twin is the way by which we can, as individuals, continue to have an individuality. And this is something that humans are, it's, if they can collaborate, and they should collaborate, fine. But there's no reason to eliminate the peculiarities of each person's destiny on the one hand. We're all born in different places and differently. I am like, where I agree fully on the question is, does that really threaten a new approach to nature? Yes, it does. It's a real problem. And it's a problem that has to be solved, because the way I'm working with these autonomous, symbiotic autonomous systems is that precisely the digital twin would be the best interpretation of a system at large, what would respect nature as opposed to dump on it. I know I'm in a a schizophrenic situation because I want to keep the self. I think it's a nice horse. It's fun. It's fun to have a self, and I wouldn't want to be completely teleguided. And there's a tendency of algorithmic decisions to do that, and maybe having a digital twin under control, my control, but under my control the way my car is under my control. It's also controlled by the roadways. So I assume that the hybrid environmental system, which based on data and information, just the way a self-driving car is based on data and information, would guarantee that my behavior would maintain a social order that was acceptable to all. The way we do. I mean, that doesn't mean that I want to keep control of reality. No, I want to meet it. It's not because we have extension, technological extension. I found wonderful that title that you brought up, the Enchanted Determinism. You know, we are in an enchanted determinism. I've been accused of being deterministic for a long time, so I've made my peace with it. I think that certain technologies are ground technologies, and they really turn their figures into fields, literally. The alphabet was determining a specific Western approach to reality. The digital is changing that, and we just hope that the next iteration of a technological change, which is what I mean by the quantum, and I wrote about that, my writing about quantum ecology is based on combining or reconciling the continuation of being a person, which I think is threatened, and respecting the environment and the animals and the plants. I have more respect for plants than I ever had. Now, I was brought up as a kid in India, and I learned about Jain. You know Jain? It's a special sect in the south of India that respects every possible animal life. They won't even kill a mosquito who's about to bite them. So that tells you that it goes very far. It's not, they will abandon self-defense in order to respect life. When I look at animals, when I look at plants, I think that they need that respect. And we don't have that. And that's the very thing that is the other side of my quest. But it is my quest. That is, I'm not pretending to be an academic here. I am just a person thinking and integrating, finding the parameters around me and finding out what we can do with what we have. That's my answer. It's not a very good one, I understand. And so, because it's true, I can't get out of it. I can't get out of the fact that being a person is a valuable thing that can happen to a human. And to give it up right without a fight, I won't.
There's Manuela with a hand up.
Hello, Betti, hello, Derrick. Thank you for your inspiring lessons. It was a pleasure to hear you. There are a couple of issues that, according to me, are both connected to the topic of this year of the summer school. I was quite impressed by this idea, for example, Betti, of the negative knowledge. It's a very interesting perspective from which to observe a new way of making inquiry and a new way of making research. And I have to tell you that just at the beginning of 2020, I've been inside a conference inside San Marino. The topic was the future of design education. And Piero Formica made a speech, and then I know that he made also a TED speech on that, about the creative ignorance, which is a concept that is quite close to this idea of negative knowledge, because he talks of this creative ignorance as the awareness of the gaps that are inside our system. So in a certain way, it's connected to uncertainty, but he speaks of those gaps as the possibility that we have to create new knowledge. And this is something that I connect very closely to our idea of prototyping. Because yesterday, when we presented the topic of the summer school, which should be prototyping research, we shift the idea of prototyping to the one of prototyping, with the idea that instead of trying to close the system through a prototype, and maybe, Derrick, this is connected with the digital twin, which is supposed to be the prototype or another prototype of our behaviors and belongings and stuff like that. The prototypes leaves some path opens and is meant not to give answers in a closer representation of what can be, but also being projected in a certain sense into the future, leave the field a bit open, leave some gaps that others can fill through their imagination. So I think it's interesting, this topic of the prototyping as another epistemological perspective that we can have also with this idea of the negative knowledge that I like very much, I have to tell you.
Thanks, Manuela. I think the prototyping then will be a tangible material way of creating knowledge, working with the unknown, with uncertainty as a material. So feeding through the notion of negative knowledge, which I also like enormously, because it is also asking us researchers to be aware of the limitation of our research inquiry, and sort of it's like exploring the liminal areas around what is it that we think we are researching that might not even be the real thing that we are really researching sometime. I know it's a little bit convoluted, but I think, okay, to visualize a negative knowledge, a prototype will be excellent, because we will need really to make perhaps even a design experience. So what does it mean to explore those liminal areas and to work at the threshold where in order to figure out something we try to figure out first what that thing is not. And the notion of gaps, of course, is fundamental. Philosopher Alfred North Whitehead actually wrote that life is what happens in the interstice.
Yes. Perfectly.
And I have a question as well, if I may, as in particular referring to the quantum computation and also to the sort of timeline that Derrick offered about the digital twin. But the question is also for you, Betti. How do you see that, in particular, quantum computation, and so the relationship with information that is produced through quantum computation, can affect the concept of time, as we are talking about more than human futures? So we are still assuming the concept of where there's a present, there's a past, and there's a future that can be closer or not. But how do you see that this kind of approach can change the understanding of time?
Well, in principle, quantum is bypassing both space and time. That's the first thing. And so even some quantum experiments with the split screen, you know, when you shoot a photon across a plate which has two splits, you have either on the other end, you have particles that show up or you have waves that show up. And this has been the first thing that got everybody very excited about the possibility that that did not reflect classical physics. Experiments using the same setup, but with multiplying by 2 or 3 other people being observers of the observation as opposed to be observer of the event, have identified the possibility that quantum can go back in time, which is kind of interesting. I mean, what implication is that? Can we travel in time? Obviously, that's the the provocation is coming. The prototype, I love the expression, by the way. The prototype is actually figuring out a way by which, using quantum experiments, you could actually predict the possibility of moving back in time. Regarding space, one of the major principles of quantum physics is non-locality. And non-locality, for example, is expressed by entanglement. The fact that there's no difference whether two particles are bound together via entanglement, whether they are next to each other or where they are on another planet. It's the same. So there's no non-locality, which means that space is not relevant to quantum physics. The way I interpret this is a very big provocation, is that what we are doing now is the only thing. There is nothing preceding what we're doing now. It's already gone. It's not there. So it doesn't have space and it doesn't have time. And there's nothing yet in what's going to succeed in our discussion. And I find trying to synthesize in my mind that idea that there's nothing before and nothing after, and there's only things that are entangled because it's the entanglement of my experience, your experiences, our technology, our concepts, at this time, with as much as it can encompass, or as little as it can encompass, that actually creates the situation, which means that reality is always an epiphany. It wasn't there before and it won't be after. It's only now. And only now eliminates completely the question of time and space. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about quantum physics. But again, it's a lot of speculation. What I'm working on now is actually to try and bring together all the speculations of the best minds in quantum physics, who are, all of their work is based on mathematics. And how do you explain mathematics to people? I'm not a mathematical expert. And the kind of if you were good at math when you were in school, you wouldn't be good enough to deal with the mathematics of quantum physics. So you have to rely on the conclusions that these mathematicians, physicians, draw from their study. For example, Aerts, one of them, a man called Aerts, Alexander Aerts, said something which is really useful. He said that concepts are in a state of indetermination in our heads, in our minds, so that as long as they haven't been expressed or selected, they are in superposition. That leads me to Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake is a festival of superposition. And as you read Finnegan's Wake, and I try every now and then, I was trained to read Finnegan's Wake by McLuhan, who loved it. I think most of his insights come from Finnegan's Wake. But Finnegan's Wake is this. You have 5 or 6 different levels of a joke, of a pun, because it's all puns, and a pun is a superposition. And before you have made up your mind of what you interpret the pun with, it's not there yet. It is your decision that makes an outcome. And you tell that, and that becomes particle. But it's a wave before you've told it. And it's a wave that has all possibilities. So when you think about provocation or prototyping, you are literally entering in a world of possibilities in superposition. And that's very valuable.
Thank you, Derrick. Betti, which are, on your perspective, on a philosophical perspective, so at the epistemological level, the consequences of this quantum approach, in your opinion, at this point, especially in relation to the time element?
I think it's a huge conversation concerning quantum theory, quantum ecology, quantum theory, because it really shows the limitation of our human way of thinking, especially in Western thought, in Western philosophy, the inability to actually understand dynamism and to understand that things are in flux. And this is something that, for instance, Bergson wrote a lot about, and how, we cannot, in our conceptual framework, hold together two aspects of the same logic. The fact that stasis is dynamic, that matter is form, and structure is process, and our cultural legacy in the West, at least, has taught us to constantly separate and trying to abstract and create abstraction to grasp a world that ultimately is in flux. And that's where the quantum perspective is a huge challenge, and is a challenge that we can embrace, moving away from the epistemology and the ontology we are used to. That's why I had the slides about post-ontological inquiry, and how do we do that? How do we attune ourselves and our research to that movement, to that becoming, which is also about, again, the potential and therefore the uncertain.
I think it's very fascinating, especially if we put this at the level, of course, of policies and governmental decisions, because when it gets to structures that need to provide directions for communities, entire countries, and so on, thinking that there is no past, present, or futures, but it's the being is in the being. The impact at the level of designing policy, I think it's huge, and can be very interesting for us this week to see the opportunity in this sense. Jonathan, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you both for such stimulating and kind of mind-blowing talks. I wanted to, the question that I have is perhaps slightly a different track from the questions we've just had, and it's probably more to do with like a mentoring question, like an advice type of question, to do with, to both of you actually. You got about 40 PhD researchers on the call. And as well as understanding that everyone else on the call is somehow immersed in research, probably that's been going on for years in different ways. So the question is about that sort of tension between feeling like you know what something is, but at the same time wanting to not know and consider other possibilities. And I think in design especially, we sort of flourish in that multiple possibility exploratory world, and yet it seems that a lot of the contexts designers find themselves in, we are expected to know what to do. And there's this really consistent tension that I see in so many places. So I guess my question is sort of what advice do you have for people doing research that finds them living through that tension? Yeah, and perhaps Betti first.
That's thank you, Jonathan. I think that is such a big question, because it really brings the conversation back to how do we teach, and the educational environment, and the pedagogical instruments that we use. In my experience, I always see this it's not, sometimes it's not simply a tension, is almost a conflict between the different souls in design discipline. The one, you know, the side that is more industry facing, commercially oriented, devoted to efficiency and production, and the other side that it cohabits at the same time, that is inherently speculative and use the same methods of inquiry to be highly critical of what perhaps other colleagues are doing on the same brief. In terms of mentoring, I mean, the suggestion that I would share with students and PhD students engaging with design research will be to embrace the possibility that is given by embodied learning, by working with very diverse teams, and by focusing on staying with questions rather than trying to find solutions. So using a problem framing rather than answering, even when the briefs are still written in such a way as to ask for answers. And that means to use design as a way to problematize what is given rather than simplifying. I don't know whether the word needs more complexity, but certainly the word needs more richness. And I think designer can do that.
Well, I think that here comes an important dimension which has been already, let's say, called yesterday, the concept of, and also today we have mentioned it, the concept of knowledge which is situated, but also knowledge that through embodiment pass through an individual experience. So the idea that there's not a shared body of knowledge that is built and recognized already by a scientific community. But in this perspective, what does it mean that individually we produce knowledge that is reliable or not, how it can be shared, and let's say which is the process that we use, we create to produce this kind of knowledge. I think that we try to put this on the plate of our students yesterday as an opening that not necessarily was ready to be considered this in this week, but at this point I think it's important to consider also this perspective. What do you think, Betti or Derrick, if you want?
Well, I have a method with my class which I think I trust my students and I rely on them. And they've got different experiences from me. And so what I do is put them together in small groups. I call that connected intelligence workshops. So they each have a job. So they have not a job, a responsibility. So you have you have designers, which is producing. You have research, you have coordination. But basically, I give a general topic to my class. And every group, I have about 50 students, usually between 50 and 55 students, and I put them in groups, and each group of 6 to 8 takes one aspect of the general issue. Last year it was reset. Everybody was talking about reset after COVID and so on, and we decided we're going to each come to the problem of reset, dealing with various aspects on energy, town planning, what was it? Reducing plastics, things like that. And so at the end, they present a product, a research product, which they have developed themselves. And I don't take directorship. I think the director of each group is a coordinator. I don't think anybody should take ownership of the project, not even the coordinator. The most important, perhaps, function is that there is a connector, and the connector goes from one group to the other, and then collects ideas from each group, brings back those ideas, gives ideas to the group he or she has visited, and then there's a group of connectors in the end that actually bring together the harmony of the whole process. So it's not so much, yeah, I have a lecture on anthropology of communication, which is the title of the course, but I'm giving them some basic ideas to work with, as opposed to say, this is where it's at and this is how you should proceed. And so I trust my students from that point of view. I've always felt that, if they're really in there, they will do a lot better than me.
Can I just add something to that? I love this idea of the connectors, which I'm going to steal and try with my students. I think what is important for us, a researcher, for designer, practitioner, for students, is reflecting on their positionality as practitioners, so that not simply their work, but also the impact of their work in the world, which is not a real world out there, but is part of what we are already, is always at the forefront of practice and critical practice, which means to attend to what is not perhaps immediately visible. And now I'm thinking about the wonderful piece of work, The Anatomy of an Artificial Intelligence by Kate Crawford and Bratton, which really tells us how technology, how the eco voice assistant actually work, revealing the hidden infrastructure, the labor, the digital labor, the mining. And this is what I think today designers need to be particularly attentive to.
Agreed. That's good. I'll get to that book. And by the way, what are the three ecologies that Guattari talks about?
It's a wonderful short book and absolutely on the reading list.
But what the name of each ecology?
It talks about semiotics, it talks about cognition, it talks about machinic, it talks about affects.
Okay, I'll get there.
If I may steal a few more minutes from you, Betti and Derrick, there's a question from one of our PhD students, Angelica, which is asking in chat your perspective on algorithms and cultural interpretations or cultural bias, and which are the possible scenarios related to this relation.
Well, I would say it's very much what I was just talking about right now. It is really being critically attentive in order to highlight the bias. And let's not forget that those bias, as has been said before, are baked in by human interventions, by programmers, computer scientists, human interventions. They reflect and reshape our world in ways that are not particularly harmonious. So whoever has the skill and the capacity to work at that level, and I'm talking to the computer scientist in the room, should really have these notions as a priority, I think. It's a critical awareness.
Yes.
But it's also very difficult to start from zero premises or from zero biases. We discover biases as critical people look into where they come from and what consequences they have, and this is very helpful. But I guess doubting everything you say, which is the reason I leave my students to do the job, doubting everything you say is a very good strategy. But it also keeps you speechless sometimes.
Well, it's a provocation which we need to take on, I guess. Marco.
So it's fashionable. Yes. Biases are fashionable, and uncovering biases is equally fashionable. So there are certain times where specific biases hit the kind of the mainstream. And often it's a bit like art form. They come from underground, people who have been really working at it and have discovered things that have shaped the way they design, they think, they write, they make art. It's a very important process, this movement from the edge to the center, from the periphery to the center. But it is also something that it creates its own new biases. When you have uncovered so many biases, gender biases clearly are among the most known, and they turn and churn, I should say, into the collective consciousness and end up sort of putting aside biases that are ignored until they too have been brought up to consciousness by research. So I don't know how long we'll be into unearthing biases. Is it an ever process, or will we one day, among our critical approaches, eliminate all biases? My sense is that language itself is biased.
Okay, so I have one final question, maybe to close this session, and thank you very much, of course, for your presentations and for the highly interesting conversations we've been having. Both of you in your presentations, this is kind of a provocation, of course, as we're used to do here. Both of you in your presentation said that, of course, artificial intelligence is not intelligence, no, it's not a real intelligence. And we tend to, define intelligence in ways that distinguishes us from other species or other forms of humans and non-humans, which are not able to do the same things we do. So there's a tendency to kind of move the goalposts each time that a new kind of intelligence emerges. So, of course, there is this Turing test, which was designed by Alan Turing to define if an actor was intelligent, and it was based on basically answering questions. And many machine learning algorithms now could get close to solving that kind of test. And of course, researchers tend to say that is not enough to define intelligence. Do you have an idea of what could define not intelligence, but to have some kind of Turing test for designers? So what would be the characteristic of a machine that can design? You have it behind the screen, and you have to tell if it is actually a designer or not a designer.
That's cool.
Can I go first? Because this is such a brilliant question. First of all, I think the Turing test it's no longer a valid blueprint to understand the kind of intelligence that we are creating, co-creating, or we're getting hybridized with, and to actually argue that human intelligence is the matrix, it's actually, it reveals human limitations, that they won't be fit for the sort of the quantum, the next quantum step, because it doesn't take into account non-human intelligence that could be used and perhaps are already being used to think about artificial intelligence or machine intelligence in a way that is not inspired by human and not benchmarked onto human cognition. A couple of years ago, I did a presentation at the Artificial Intelligence Association in Stanford, and I think that was my provocation. I was the only philosopher in a room of computer scientists, and I shared the idea that we could use cephalopods cognition as a way to model artificial intelligence, and the way in which cephalopods and octopus in particular are able to think and relate it to the environment, the way in which their nervous system is modeled is so different. It's probably the most alien entity on the planet compared to the human. And of course, let's not forget Willem Flusser wrote an amazing book about the Vampirotheotis Infernalis, which is a way to destabilize human-centeredness by taking as an example this really weird animal, weird creatures, and using their particular perspective to disassemble human-centeredness.
Cool. I've got another one for you because it's very recent. It's called The Blob. I can't believe that they have called it The Blob, but that's what it's called. And it is an animal that doesn't have a brain. It doesn't even have a nervous system. And yet it behaves in recognizably intentional and, according to judgment, which of course could be considered as just being subjective, still efficient ways. So our nervous system, our brain, might just be superfetatory. I mean, they're like, well. So no, I'm interested in this question very much so, because when I talk about that, and I deal with this question quite often, and of course my first response is using Google Translate or DeepL or whatever. They can translate anything into any other language without knowing the first thing about what they're translating, what intelligence should normally have. So there is a tremendous amount of technical and structural intelligence in artificial intelligence, because intelligere means to put things together. And they put things together very well. And they arrive at conclusions which are extremely useful. So clearly the product is intelligent. The process isn't. The process is statistical recognition, pattern recognition. We know that that's how it works. But let's apply this general thought, and back to your cephalopod as well. What about coronavirus? How intelligent is coronavirus? Getting the Delta variant, you really have to be very bright to be able to come up with a variant that is twice as effective as your previous model. No, you want provocation, this is one of them. I consider coronavirus as one animal, not a myriad, and it's not even an animal. This is somewhere between, mineral and animal, but it is one. And as one, it communicates with itself. It faces all kinds of different conditions in different countries with different cultures, deals with stoppers. No, this guy won't be affected by my action, but that one is. And why? What's the difference between those two guys? That's intelligent. Coronavirus is intelligence. It's a distributed being that faces challenges and responds to them. I'm sorry it is using us to do its experiment. But if we're going to talk about intelligence, I think coronavirus could actually be qualifying. And it's another Turing test.
Thank you.
Well, it's definitely a contemporary, very, very much relatable example, which it perfectly fits to the more than human concept. There's a reaction in the audience. Arnold is saying, or is coronavirus closer to the proverbial infinite number of monkeys and as typewriters producing the works of Shakespeare's, where the intelligence is in the system, not in any particular element. Well, I think the concept of a product that is intelligent and not the system or the process that is intelligent is definitely a reference important to carry on our exercise this week. I think that we have a lot of stimuli already for for our exercise, but in general, for the general public here today, it has been really a pleasure to have you both in conversation. We thank you very much for sharing with us your knowledge and perspective and your questions. We're gonna embrace them and try to answer with other questions through our prototype and see if there's any guidance that is helpful for us as designers, as community, but also as citizens. So if you feel that next week you want to take a look to what we will be working on this week, you are very welcome to join us. And
thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for meeting Jonathan and Betti. And I knew Marco already, and both of you, all three. But it's a wonderful experience for me, for sure, and I'm sure Betti enjoyed that too.
Absolutely, it was terrific, and thank you to all of you for the input and the invitation. Thank you, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to the next occasion.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you to our public.
Thank you.
To our PhD students.
Bye.
We'll leave you free to start thinking a little bit more about what we have discussed.